If you are looking for a book that really gives you an extraordinary exploration of Black women's lives in the early 20th century in urban America, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I'm taking a look at Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments by Saidiya Hartman. Welcome to Spencer's Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're taking a look at another one of the books that came to my attention because of the New York Times Top 100 Books of the 21st Century. I wouldn't say that I'm trying to make my way through the whole list, but I have gone through and picked out a few that just looked interesting, either because they were ones that I already had heard of and they'd been on my to-read list and I'm finally getting to them, or because they were books that I hadn't heard of, but the premise seemed interesting. And today would be one of those books. This book came in the list at 96, so it's relatively low on the list, but it was also relatively recently published in 2019, and it made a lot of the book prize shortlist, and so it just seemed like an appealing read to me. As someone that reads a fair amount of nonfiction already in my life, I was curious about what was going to be clearly an experimental approach to telling history. The author Hartman does take a very unconventional approach to a historical narrative. I mean, she blends fact, but there's also some speculation and there's some imagination to really piece together the really often overlooked experiences of young Black women as they were trying to navigate urban life, as well as their individual freedoms and as well as their sexuality. And I found this was a fascinating read by Hartman, but I did find her method of critical fabulation, where she reconstructs the inner lives of her subjects through archival fragments and also through her imagination and through her own conjecture and projection on these people of exactly how they would have perceived these events. I mean, it's as much about recovering a history as it is about showing how history can erase and distort these marginalized individuals. And so this technique, I mean, it really creates a fluid and a lyrical style that makes the book feel more like a novel or a poem than a typical historical text. And so I would say, I mean, the strengths to this book, as I've already said, that the primary purpose of this book was to try and tell the lives of a marginalized group in the early 20th century. Like I said, it explores lots of different things. I think the question of exploring their sexuality is probably the most important thing to consider, especially if you're trying to assess whether this book is going to be for you, because that is a big part of it. And I should say, when I talk about sexuality, that doesn't just mean who people are choosing to have sex with, but it is also going to include questions of sex work and questions of family life and all sorts of things along those lines that are related to the individual sexuality. And of course, this is going to be at a time period where, for a variety of reasons, we just don't have as much information. That's why a big part of the narrative involves the author really piecing things together. And it's not going to be for everyone, not just because of the subject matter, but also because the approach does have some real problems. But I do want to say, before I really dig into the problems, I want to say the things I did like about it. So, for example, Hartman's writing style, I mean, it is beautiful. It's very emotionally resonant. She's dealing with very raw feelings, and she's dealing with what people went through, the challenges they faced, and she is trying to get a fair and accurate depiction of what an individual might think in a situation, and not just try to give a generalized view. And when we tell history, we have a tendency to give the most generalized of views because that's one of the things history tries to do in creating a single narrative. Instead, Hartman, I mean, she really paints a vivid image of life for Black women in cities like Philadelphia and New York during the early 20th century, the early 1900s. The book also really challenges traditional ideas of what history is and who it is meant to serve. And so it really offers a fresh and an essential perspective in some respects. On top of that, it dives into the nuances of love and freedom and just the struggle of autonomy among young Black women, making their resistance and resilience come to life in new ways. That being said, there are certainly some drawbacks. It's not an easy read, in part because of the subject matter. On top of that, Hartman's style can be challenging for readers that are expecting a straightforward historical account, or even if people who've read lots of history books are also aware of the fact that there can be just a challenge in helping you understand how to even approach the information, understand what are the primary sources, what is their way of assessing them. And I would say that the fact that none of that is here could seem promising to some people, but it can also make you really struggle and question with, ooh, what was actually true and what did she have to make up or be imaginative about? And that could be a problem with some people. So, I mean, the speculative nature of her reconstructions just might not appeal to everyone, especially if you're looking for a strictly factual history. But those that are willing to engage with this, more poetic, this more lyrical, and this interpretive style, I think they generally will find it pretty rewarding. So who would I say that this is for? Well, if you're someone who loves history but wants something that goes beyond those dry academic narratives, or if you're interested in books that really center the voices and the lives of the Black individuals, and you just want an emotional exploration that again may feel real to the author, but you may not be able to fully prove that with factual information or with archival information. And I don't want to say that that's simply false. I'll just say that it is a particular type of interpretation that has certain value, but you just have to be careful with assessing exactly what kind of value that is. So that is who I would recommend this for. Someone that is ready to engage with this particular way of writing history, understanding that yes, there's certainly some true historical elements here, but there are also some elements that are not going to be very true to not just the discipline of history, but really any interpretation of the past. So I would say that that is going to be a drawback to some people. But if you're willing to engage with that, I do think you are going to find a lot in this book that is going to interest you, that is going to work on you, and it's going to get you to think about the challenges. I think even in a contemporary society, we have an interest in contemplating and considering what types of challenges individuals or groups might face for one reason or another, some kind of societal bias or anything along those lines. And of course, if you are trying to then go back in time and even more fully understand it, or whether it's because it's going to lead to a contemporary understanding, or go back in time to see how it could be completely different, I think all of that is here, and it's something that is going to give you a lot to think about. But who would I say this is not for? Well, people that are not interested in engaging with this new type of history writing. Maybe I shouldn't call it new, because I don't think it's necessarily a lasting form of history writing. It is a type of history writing, but I don't think it's on the verge of replacing not just the current discipline of history, but even other types of popular history writing. I do think that it's going to fall short in many regards for people that like history. They might just struggle with the overall structure of this and the liberties that are taken by the author. On top of that, people that aren't interested in discussing are obviously going to be some challenging stories of women growing up in the early 20th century, the racism that they face, the sexual violence that they're going to face, the other forms of prejudice that they might face for one reason or another. That is very much at the heart of this book. And if you don't think that's going to appeal to you, then this book is not going to be for you. And last but not least, even if you are someone that is thinking, yeah, I do want to try an imaginative and an experimental type of history, and I am curious about exploring what it was like to be a young Black woman in the early 20th century in those urban centers, but the subject specifically of their sexuality, their sexual relationships, that could also very much put you off. And I think understandably so. That's not something everyone wants to engage with, and I think understandably. So those are my thoughts on this book and who I think it is and isn't for. I can't give you a whole lot of details about the book itself because, again, when it comes to a history book like this, and particularly of this structure, there's just not a lot I can say aside from my overall sense of it. I'm not going to sit here and tell you who the main characters were or anything like that, because that's not how it's structured. It actually has a ton of different characters. I think it's much more valuable for you to simply understand that it is this interpretive approach to telling history of young Black women in the early 20th century in urban centers. I think you're going to get more out of that description than me trying to actually outline who the different characters are. But I really would like to know what you guys have to say about this book. Please let me know in the comments if you liked it, if you thought the experimental elements were interesting, or if you found something else that was more appealing or less appealing about the book. Please let me know. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.